You're in there, aren't you? Open up. Give me a break. I was just enjoying my new place. Open the door. I didn't want to be a nuisance to the neighbors, so I reluctantly opened the front door. You're infertile and you're still leaving the house. I don't acknowledge you as a daughter-in-law. My husband, his mistress, and my mother-in-law were all standing there. Huh? For the sake of the new wife and the grandchild that's on the way, we'll take this house as compensation. Please leave. Yeah, get out already. That's right, infertile woman, thanks for everything. Oh, they really say whatever they want, don't they? They don't even realize they're mistaken. My name is Michelle. I'm a 43-year-old office worker. My husband, Stephen, is a year younger than me. We don't have children. We thought it would happen naturally, but we weren't blessed. After many discussions, we chose to live just the two of us. I don't regret it. The apartment we've lived in since we got married is small and old, but it's not inconvenient. Saving money for our own home and living modestly is enjoyable. Recently at work, I was assigned to the planning department, which I had always hoped for. The hard work I put in at the sales department paid off. I got a raise and became someone who's relied upon in the company. It's not an exaggeration to say that my job is my passion, especially since I have no children. But it seems my husband feels differently. Huh? You quit your job again? Yeah. What, you didn't discuss it with me? I was so shocked I couldn't speak. My boss was being annoying because I refused a transfer. So you quit because of that? Technically, yes, but I'm the victim here. It's wrongful termination. I sighed. Then you should sue and claim compensation. Nah, I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I know the truth. He wasn't wrongfully terminated. This is just one of my husband's bad habits. He can't stick to a job. It's not that he's unserious, but he just suddenly gets fed up and quits. It's become normal for him to change jobs every 2 or 3 years, but each time, it disrupts our budget and lifestyle, which is exhausting. As his partner, I can't just tell him to endure a job he hates. But we're both in our 40s now. In moments like this, I think it's good we don't have kids. I can be the one to support us. And I hope he would do the same for me if something happened. I knew it, but his job search wasn't going well, and time was just passing by. The timing was bad, and surely age and his career history were issues. He was getting frustrated. He would just sit at home all day, not doing any housework, constantly sighing. If he has time, he could at least tidy up the mess he made in the room. I have more right to be frustrated than you. Maybe I should give him a piece of my mind. In times like this, it's tough when the house is small, there's no escape. Let's calm down. Fighting won't do us any good. I held back my urge to blame him and just kept an eye on him. Finally, he got a job as a contract worker at a factory. It wasn't what he hoped for, but it's better than being unemployed. Let's start trying again, bit by bit. Together, we'll surely be okay. Then one day, I got a call from my mother-in-law. Hello? Michelle? What's the matter, Mom? I heard you've been cold to Stephen. Huh? I let out a surprised exclamation. I couldn't guess what she was talking about. You're being harsh on Stephen, who's hurt from being wrongfully terminated, aren't you? Hold on. I don't recall doing anything like that. What do you mean? That's what I want to know. Pushing you to work or to clean up, you've been harsh, haven't you? Why would it come to that? Indeed, I did say things like hope you find a job soon and please pick up the stuff you left out, indirectly. But it was never in a commanding tone. This is also one of my husband's bad habits. Whenever something happens, he immediately runs to his mother. And he even exaggerates the story. I think it's bad that his mother takes it all at face value, but I wonder when he'll ever grow up. That's too much. Stephen wouldn't blame you, would he? Well, there's no reason for him to. What are you saying, Michelle? You deserve to be blamed. It's your fault we don't have children. Huh? Isn't there something more important than work? Regret won't bring anything back. Why is the lack of children being blamed on me? It seems my husband is making up some very convenient stories. Even though we decided together, I feel betrayed. He may want to save face, but getting his mother on his side to treat me like the villain is like a child's spite. We're a couple who will spend a lot more time together, so we shouldn't lose trust. With that in mind, I decided to talk to him that night. Please don't exaggerate things to your mother. If you have complaints, I want you to tell me directly, for the sake of our future. Let's both do that, okay? My husband, clearly annoyed, started fiddling with his smartphone in the middle of our conversation. Hey, listen to me. Quiet, I'm getting work calls. Saying that, he got up from his seat. He didn't return to our conversation and just went straight to the bedroom. Was he in a bad mood or just tired from working at the factory? It can't be helped. We'll talk another time. But the next day, he refused to talk, saying he was tired and sleepy. The following day, he came home in the morning from a company welcome party. He spent the whole holiday sleeping off a hangover. After that, he was out late every night due to overtime and dinner with colleagues. Clearly avoiding me. Trying to let it all fade away, but that won't solve the problem. I hate being unfairly blamed by his mother. Rubbing my sleepy eyes, I wait for my husband's return. It's a problem that shouldn't be postponed just because it's troublesome. Around the time the date changes, my husband comes home in a great mood, humming a tune. Welcome back.
Whoa! You scared me!
What's going on? Surprised, huh? Were you awake? I was waiting for Steven. Huh? My husband looked annoyed. Why are you avoiding this? Stop nagging me. You've been acting strange lately.
You're so persistent. If you have something to say, just leave a note.
A note? Was the deal to settle things without talking? Yeah. Can't believe you remember such old stuff, you really are persistent. I was stunned. Did he forget our marriage vows? I said a couple should understand each other, and he agreed with me.
I used to like you're diligent, but now it's inflexible and burdensome.
That's harsh. If you don't want to lose me, you better change your attitude. There are other women out there. What do you mean? Exactly what I said. Are you cheating? I had suspicions about his recent behavior.
You're kidding, right? What have I done? I told you, you're being too clingy. Do you want a divorce?
Don't say that. My husband clicked his tongue. He pulled a paper out of his bag and shoved it at me roughly. It was a completed divorce form. Why do you have this? I was asked to write it. By whom? You know who. No, I don't understand. There's another woman who wants me to file it. I was at a loss for words. Had my husband written the divorce form at his mistress's request?
Now that you understand, don't get cocky. You're nothing without me, so know your place.
I gripped the divorce form with trembling hands. I could hear my heartbeat. What time do you think it is? I'm going to sleep. You go somewhere and cool off. My husband disappeared into the bedroom. I stared at my husband's name written on the divorce papers. What was he feeling when he wrote this? Was he late today because he was meeting his mistress? I, who had supported him in his new job, must have looked like such a foolish wife. I got confusing, and I felt dizzy. I couldn't think of anything. Just as he said, I needed to cool off. I silently grabbed my valuables and essentials and left the house without a word. 1 month later. I hadn't been home since then. I tried to contact my husband a few times, but there was no reply. This room is quiet and comfortable. It feels peaceful. The sunlight pours through the windows, brightly illuminating the still empty living room. The ventilation is good too. When the cold air touches my cheek, I can't help but take a deep breath, and the scent of wood seeps in. Then, Michelle, I know you're in there. Open up. An annoying voice called out, and I frowned. This piercing voice was my mother-in-law's. I really wished she would give me a break. I was enjoying a peaceful moment.
Michelle!
I didn't want to cause a disturbance to the neighbors, so I reluctantly opened the front door. With a clearly annoyed expression.
I knew you were here. It's been a while.
My mother-in-law said happily. She tried to barge in, so I pushed her back. Wait a minute, please. What's wrong? What happened? Hey, can you see my face? I'm rejecting you, okay? Well, this place isn't bad at all. Behind her, for some reason, my husband was there. And who was that young woman standing next to him? It smells like a new house, nice. It's nice, isn't it? All three of them naturally tried to enter the house. Their audacity knew no bounds.
Wait a minute. How did you find out where I am?
What do you mean how? First, answer my question. Why do you always treat Steven so badly? Huh? Leaving everything behind and running away from home, that's the worst a wife could be. Just because you don't like Dorothy here. Dorothy? Oh, this young woman. I see, she's approved by my mother-in-law. Wait a minute? Did I run away from home? I thought it was more like my husband telling me where to go, like he was kicking me out. My husband stood provocatively close to the young woman, looking at me challengingly. The number of rooms is just right, and the interior design is decent. I guess I can forgive you for buying a new house on your own. Huh? But living together is out of the question. After all, your infertility makes for a bad image. Excuse me, what are you talking about?
You should be grateful that I stayed with you this long.
Huh? I was bewildered and tilted my head in confusion. Steven, I am tired and wants to sit down. That's right, sorry Dorothy. Michelle, let Dorothy sit inside the house. No way.
Huh? Dorothy is pregnant with Steven's child.
Pregnant? That was news to me. Yet, surprisingly, I wasn't much shaken. Why is that? Maybe it's because the shock of continuous events has made reality unbelievable. Or perhaps I just don't feel anything anymore. Pregnant women should be respected, right? I guess you wouldn't understand that, Michelle. Oh, is that so?
Don't you get it? I acknowledge Dorothy as the wife, not you, Michelle. We'll take this house as compensation, so get out.
Yeah, get out already. That's right, thanks for nothing, barren lady. How could they say such things? Unaware of their own misunderstandings. I can't just give you this house as compensation. Even if you tell me to leave, this house is in my name. Huh? We're already divorced, you know? What? My husband and mother-in-law were shocked. Is it really such a surprise? Weren't you the ones who handed me the filled-out divorce papers? Michelle, what do you mean? Weren't you planning to start a new life with us?
I had no such intention.
The mother-in-law panicked and my husband was furious. What are you talking about?
I bought this house with my own money.
Huh? Incredible. They probably haven't read a single one of the emails I sent. You really didn't know anything, did you? The night my husband handed me the divorce papers. All the endurance I had maintained as a wife suddenly vanished, filled with a sense of liberation. I was so happy that I couldn't think of anything else. Wait, does this mean my free life is about to begin? When I realized this, I got so excited I felt dizzy. While feeling thrilled, I signed the wife section of the divorce papers and submitted them to the public office first thing the next morning. I divided our savings equally and transferred half to my husband's account. Considering what I had earned, I believe most of the savings were rightfully mine, but I wanted to avoid any disputes. I suggest we communicate through lawyers from now on, I informed him via email. With half of the savings we split and the bonus I received afterward, I made a down payment on a new house. The rest was covered by a loan. A loan? How can a housewife possibly get a loan? My husband said condescendingly. Well, if you kept changing jobs, of course, you wouldn't be able to get a loan. Huh? You wouldn't know since you don't manage the finances, but my salary is twice what you make. His face turned red with rage, possibly wounded in his pride. Even Dorothy seemed taken aback by this. Stephen, this isn't what you told me. You said we'd live in a new luxury home, right? Oh, calm down, Dorothy. My husband was pitifully flustered. Well, he's my ex-husband now. I had been the one supporting our finances all along. It's ridiculous to think I would live with his new wife and mother-in-law.
Michelle!
My mother-in-law seemed ready to explode with anger.
This is fraud. Mom, who wrote the divorce papers first? And who encouraged him to write them? It was that lady over there, your future daughter-in-law, who will support you. And congratulations on the upcoming grandchild. No, we'll take the house as well.
My mother-in-law was breathing heavily in arrogance. She is incredibly arrogant. That's not possible. It's such a big house, it's a waste for just you, Michelle, isn't it? I plan to live here with my parents eventually. What? What is this daughter-in-law talking about? No, I'm no longer your daughter-in-law, we have no relation. And who knows, maybe I'll have another wonderful encounter. Of course, I wouldn't say that out loud. What are we going to do? I was all set to live in this house. The mother-in-law slumped her shoulders. What happened to the apartment you were living in, Mom? I sold that old place. You sold it? Yes, when I happened to see you moving appliances into this new house, I immediately contacted Stephen and he invited me to live with you all. So that was the situation. That means the only thing left is the small, old house I used to live in. Not that I feel sympathy for them. Unlike you, Michelle, who is a tough career woman, we now have a young and docile daughter-in-law and a grandchild on the way, and we thought we'd be secure with a new house in the future. I wish she'd stop speaking ill of people while looking so pitiful. Who's tough? I had to be strong because my husband was so pathetic. Oh, what a letdown. But I'll go home and tell everything to Daddy. Dorothy seemed to have given up. Huh? Wait, that's too bad. If Daddy gets angry, it's going to be a big problem. You better take responsibility. Dorothy, please, anything but that. As for why my husband got such a young girl pregnant, it turned out she was an office assistant at his company and things just went too far after a drinking party, and it happened in one time. He thought she was just an employee, but she turned out to be the daughter of the factory manager. Raised in a girls' school, this lady, despite her flashy looks, had zero experience with men. It turns out my husband was her first, and she didn't know he was married. Believing the classic cheater's line, "My wife and I have grown apart, we'll be divorcing soon," she went out of her way to prepare the divorce papers for him. It sounds like she'll make a very considerate wife, good for you. Congratulations. Well, that's the situation. You all can do as you please now.
Wait.
I felt a chill as my ex-husband clung to the door, trying to keep me from closing it. Michelle. Don't you have any maternal instincts? What do you think this new life coming into the world is? Michelle, if you can't give us alimony, we'll take this house as a birth gift instead. To my desperate ex-husband and former mother-in-law, I said with a broad smile. Congratulations, goodbye. I mercilessly closed and locked the door. I planned to leave it to my lawyer. But it wasn't going to be that easy. After all, these are the kind of people who shamelessly demand someone's house, they won't back down easily. I can ignore further emails filled with resentment from my ex-husband by simply replying, "Please contact my lawyer." However, the real problem is my mother-in-law. She leaves long messages on the voicemail, which are truly annoying. Because of Michelle, I've become a homeless old woman. Could you at least arrange another apartment for me? This house is too cramped and suffocating. When I told my daughter-in-law to do some housework, she just said, "You do it." What am I supposed to do now? I would like to delete these voicemails immediately, but they might be useful, so I decide to save them. Their demands might escalate. They are shamelessly audacious, after all. One day, an unwelcome visitor arrived at my house. Without any prior notice, the doorbell rang, and I gripped my smartphone, wondering if it was my ex-husband or mother-in-law and if I should prepare to call the police. At the door stood a man with a stern look and sharp eyes. I was on guard. He seemed vaguely familiar, but I was sure I didn't know such an intimidating man. Could this be some sort of scam disguised as a door-to-door sale? Who might you be? I'm Smith, the factory manager. Then it hit me. Dorothy's father, the factory manager. That's right, she had mentioned telling Daddy. And there they were, my ex-husband and Dorothy, peeking from behind him, grinning. They brought some tough-looking backup. Daddy, tell her. Sir, please teach her a lesson. The factory manager's lips formed a thin line, his brow furrowed deeply, clearly very angry. I worried he might demand nuisance fees or birth costs. As I was about to resolve to call the police, looking at my smartphone.
This is most regrettable.
What? The factory manager shouted to me.
I am terribly sorry.
Then, he grabbed my ex-husband and Dorothy and forced them to apologize.
Apologize. More.
Okay.
Daddy? Why? This wasn't the plan.
I stared in bewilderment. What on earth was happening?
Don't get it twisted. I brought them here to apologize to you.
What?
I truly apologize. My daughter took your husband and even demanded your house.
Yes, that's correct. My ex-husband and Dorothy began to panic. Daddy, you knew? Yes, I knew. All the things you told me about being deceived and having your home taken, were those all lies? Where did you hear that?
Your mother told me everything.
The factory manager, his face contorted with anger. He explained that the former mother-in-law had attempted to seduce him, saying, "We're family now, let's get along well in many ways. Your daughter stole my son. We should be able to manage just as well. Just buy me an apartment and that'll be fine. Visit whenever you like." Of course, the factory manager politely refused. I was speechless with disgust. To think this woman was my mother-in-law. You always tell convenient stories. I'm disappointed in you and your mother. Oh, come on. I've always been faithful to my wife. Don't joke around. Stop it, Daddy, you're scaring me.
You too.
What?
I've spoiled you too much because you're my precious only daughter. Both of you are no longer needed at my factory. There's a very strict workplace, so go there and start over.
What? The factory manager turned to me after addressing my ex-husband. Can you forgive us now? Yes. Why would you go to such lengths? I hope we can still have a good relationship moving forward. I was completely baffled and stared back him. Then, it dawned on me. Yes, a long time ago, he was the head of the administration department at a company I used to deal with during my sales days. I'm terribly sorry, I didn't recognize you. Now it was my turn to apologize. There's been a merger, and I manage the new plant now. It's understandable you didn't recognize me. I see. I couldn't believe your husband was working at my plant initially. The factory manager looked away, making a troubled face. Has my former husband been causing you trouble? His work attitude is poor, he doesn't learn, and he has unexcused absences. Quite the opposite of his competent wife. Imagining my ex-husband's irresponsible demeanor, I wasn't surprised. As I was no longer his wife, I had neither the need to defend nor apologize for him. All I could do was give a wry smile. I plan to retrain him from scratch. I definitely won't let him near here again. My ex-husband shrank, and Dorothy looked displeased. You were always great at training new recruits, weren't you? Yes, I was quite strict and thorough. I'll be supporting from afar. Even with the factory manager's efforts, reforming my ex-husband seemed unlikely. ultimately, he must make the effort to change himself. Especially for the sake of the innocent baby on the way. There's one thing I regret. I wanted to correct the misconception that infertility was my fault. We had once gone to the hospital together to check on the cause of our infertility. There was no issue on my part, but my husband was diagnosed with azoospermia. Natural conception wasn't impossible but was said to be difficult. That Dorothy got pregnant from just one slip-up with my ex-husband was either a miracle, they were incredibly compatible, or maybe the child wasn't his daughter. Honestly, at this point, it doesn't matter to me anymore. The factory manager updated me while contacting me about work. He told me that they ended up living in that old, cramped house for a while. They had promised to save for the baby and to seriously try working as part of their future cohabitation conditions, but Dorothy quickly couldn't stand that lifestyle. No surprise there. Stephen probably didn't realize, since I managed our finances, but living on his income alone would be barely feasible, if not impossible. If 3 adults lived freely without saving, the savings I gave him during our divorce would be gone in no time. Dorothy went back to her parents' home after giving birth and never returned. During that time, my ex-husband grew to hate his job and quit. The desperate former mother-in-law started causing trouble, demanding her daughter-in-law and grandchild back, insisting they take care of her, which led to police involvement at the factory manager's home. Pathetic. They're all too selfish. But since I'm no longer involved, I declined further updates. Hang in there, Mr. Smith. My new home is very comfortable. Being alone can be lonely and I worry about what I would do if I got sick, but I've never felt it was good to have a husband at home. Living alone now feels no different than before. I believed that spouses should support each other, but it turned out he was just leaning on me. Having an unnecessary person gone doesn't trouble me at all. 7 years later. My well-settled home now also houses my parents, whom I called from the countryside. And a former colleague from the sales department lives with us too. He was the man who always competed with me for the top sales position. After I moved to the planning department, the competition dwindled, and he mentioned missing seeing my face. The feeling was mutual. After he learned I was divorced, he immediately asked me out, and now he has become a husband I truly trust. We've worked together for many years and can say anything to each other without holding back. A truly ideal man. Here's to many more years together. Hey Kristen, what in the world happened? Nicholas finally arrived at my hospital room after I had a miscarriage. He glanced my way and muttered, again, clicking his tongue in irritation. Then, upon seeing my brother who had rushed over, he said, "And who is this guy? Don't tell me, you brought another man here?" However, my brother calmly responded, "Hey, there's been a woman with long, blood-soaked curly hair trying to hug you from behind since earlier. Do you know her by any chance?"
What are you talking about?
Nicholas looked at my brother with a startled expression. My brother pointed at Nicholas and continued, "That's the person I'm talking about. She's wearing a big peridot ring on her right ring finger." At that moment, Nicholas started to shiver violently.
Ugh!
He groaned at my brother's words and hurriedly fled the room. My name is Kristen Rodriguez, I'm 29 years old. I live with my husband Nicholas. And I'm working with no children. We are a couple who eloped. It was 5 years ago. I was just 24, in my second year of employment, and couldn't attend company social gatherings due to my parents' policies. The following year, such gatherings were less frequent due to the times, but back then, it was common for the younger employees to go out and have fun. Our family was strict about attending these gatherings, essentially making them off-limits unless absolutely necessary. I always felt out of place as my colleagues would comment on my poor socializing. During one rare outing that I sneaked away to a mixer, I met my current husband Nicholas. He was a smartly dressed salesperson 6 years older than me. He was introduced as a hard-working individual by other attendees. That day, he was considerate towards me, a newcomer to such gatherings. He helped me catch up with conversations, discreetly stopped others from pressuring me to drink, and even rescued me from an unwelcome after-party, taking me to a taxi. His demeanor back then was very gentlemanly. I was instantly attracted to him. Eventually, we started meeting privately and officially became a couple. 6 months later, he proposed. I was thrilled and immediately said yes. However, my family was not so accommodating. My family has been wealthy for generations, with my father being a senior executive at a major local company. My parents always said they would scrutinize my partner themselves, and they had been strict about relationships throughout my school years. In hindsight, my naivety in judging people was probably clear to my parents and even to my only brother, Andrew. Andrew always used to say to me, "I won't stop you from seeing whoever you like, unlike Dad and the others, but at least let me meet him first." My brother, 10 years older than me, was the most dependable person I knew. Even so, I hesitated to introduce Nicholas to him at that time. I was afraid of Andrew's piercing gaze that seemed to see right through everything. Defying our parents and avoiding Andrew's sad looks, Nicholas and I ended up eloping. I first moved into his condo, and because of that, he started facing harassment from his boss at the company where he worked at the time. My father's company was a client of his. Perhaps we were too carefree back then. We decided to quit our jobs and move to a different state together. We both decided, and then we quit our jobs and moved to another state. And there, we got married. Looking back, that might have been the happiest time for us. Because once we moved, Nicholas's attitude towards me gradually began to change. The condo we moved into was older, cheaper, and smaller than where he had lived before. Once we started living there, Nicholas suddenly told me, "I'm gonna have to work harder than ever before. So you're gonna have to take care of all the household chores." "All right, then I'll just..." I began, but Nicholas cut me off. "But of course, you should keep working full-time like before." He said it as if it were obvious. "Your job is much easier than mine, right? It's only natural you do the housework too." I couldn't respond to Nicholas. Indeed, my earnings were nowhere near his. After moving, Nicholas found another job in sales, and I managed to get re-employed as well. But it was quite different from the cushy job I had when we were financially supported by my family. The salary was lower, and the conditions were far from good. The one difference was that most of my colleagues at the new job were women about a decade older than me, and they took more care of me than those at my previous company. On my way home, I'd do the shopping and had to get used to doing all the household chores properly. In the condo where I first moved in with him, Nicholas had been particular about the interior and never let me touch the cleaning. And he was good at cooking, often having meals ready while I was asleep. However, after we moved, he stopped doing that altogether and left everything to me, harshly criticizing how I did things. "Hey! There's dust accumulating here." "I'm sorry, I didn't notice. It was the same last time. Don't think someone else is always gonna take care of it for you." All I could do was nod in agreement. At that time, I thought he was right. Indeed, at my family home, I knew how to cook, clean, and do laundry, but I didn't have to do much of it. Suddenly, I had to do everything, not just for myself but for him too. And if I didn't meet his standards, he would point it out harshly, making it a relentless and exhausting life. Moreover, even when I was tired and wanted to sleep, he would insist on maintaining our marital relations. Even though I told him I was tired, Nicholas just wouldn't listen. Gradually, his dissatisfaction with my complaints seemed to increase, and he started going out at night more frequently. Back then, I always thought this was all my fault. After all, he had been a top salesperson at a good company, and it was all because of me that he had to move out of his route and into a cramped condo. That's why I felt I had to give it my all with him. I truly believed that. And so, I pushed myself harder at work and took housekeeping more seriously, waiting for my often absent husband to come home. Maybe around the second year of our marriage, I got pregnant. But I miscarried before I even realized I was pregnant. Nicholas was surprised by this, called an ambulance immediately, and seemed worried as he stayed by my side for a while. At that moment, I thought Nicholas's affection for me had returned. But perhaps it was just an illusion. When I was discharged from the hospital and went back to work, Nicholas started dipping into our joint savings. I'm not sure when I noticed it. One day, when I went to update our bank book, I saw that the balance was rapidly decreasing.
What have you been spending money on lately?
I asked, timidly showing him the bank account.
That's none of your business, isn't it? Do you have a problem with what I do? But this bank book is our joint asset. We might need to suddenly go to the hospital like last time, and that applies to you too.
Yeah, that's true.
But that was because you miscarried on your own.
When I heard those words, I was momentarily baffled.
What are you saying? It was a miscarriage. Our child was lost. But that was something your body did on its own, wasn't it?
I was at a loss for words.
And we can always have more kids in the future. Stop talking about such depressing things.
With that, he went back to his usual routine. One day, I asked myself, no, the child we could have had then couldn't be replaced by anyone else. Even if we had another, it would be a different child. For the first time, I started to feel a sense of distrust towards Nicholas. 2 more years passed, and I was pregnant again. This time, I was determined to protect this life. I scaled back on work and planned to take maternity leave soon. However, I couldn't find the right time to discuss my pregnancy. Because Nicholas was often away on business trips during that period. But I knew that was a lie. When I called his company to ask about his business trip destination, that's when it happened.
A business trip?
Nicholas's boss asked me with a puzzled voice.
He wasn't on a business trip. I heard he took a personal day for a family event back home. Didn't you know?
Oh, no, I must have remembered wrong.
Could you please not tell him I asked? It was a misunderstanding on my part.
After hanging up the phone, I felt all my strength drain away. What a thing to say. And now that I knew he wasn't on a business trip, I had to keep up appearances in the little conversation that continued. If it seemed like I knew he had lied to the company, Nicholas could get reprimanded, which I could see happening. If it became apparent that I had lied to the company, it was clear that Nicholas would be reprimanded. If that happened, he would blame me, and there was a real risk he might become angry and resort to violence. I couldn't let that happen. At that time, I was determined to avoid such a situation at all costs. If he did that, it could endanger the life of our second child, who we were fortunate enough to conceive. So, I kept silent. Eventually, when the morning sickness became severe, I finally told Nicholas about the pregnancy. His response was, "Great, another mouth to feed." Despite my growing distrust, I couldn't believe those words. I thought those words were impossible, no way. No, it's not that. I wanted to believe they were impossible. By this time, I already knew that our joint bank account was nearly empty. After our first child was lost, I had been saving up again to cover the costs for the next childbirth from this account. However, perhaps due to growing distrust, I had been slowly saving money in a separate account as well. When I saw that the joint account was almost empty, I resolved to pay with my own funds. Of course, I kept this a secret from Nicholas. Because if he found out, he would immediately demand it and extort the money from me, that much was clear. Surprisingly, the one place I could breathe was at work. As the days went on, more colleagues, especially older women, would say, "You look pale, are you okay, or you seem tired?" Initially, I insisted I was fine and continued working. I've been at this company for over 4 years now, and it doesn't pay much, but I have a good relationship with my colleagues, and it's a comfortable place to work. That's why I've stayed longer than I did at my first job. Honestly, the people around me were happier about this pregnancy than Nicholas was. That's because I had told my female colleagues about my previous miscarriage. Many of the older colleagues had continued working through their younger years and had shifted to part-time work after pregnancy and childbirth. This meant they all understood my situation quite well. So they probably sensed the reason I was enduring severe morning sickness and still working might be because I was afraid of what my husband might do if I didn't. Eventually, the company told me that since systems were in place to handle such situations, I should really take a break if I was struggling. And that's how I was more or less forced to take a leave from work. Get some rest and then come back to work with us, they all said. Moved by their warmth, I teared up. Then, as I was about to leave, exhausted, I collapsed right there. At that time, I lost consciousness instantly and didn't realize it, but it seems I had a severe hemorrhage right there. I later learned that an ambulance was called immediately, and I was taken to the hospital. When I regained consciousness in the hospital room, I was shocked to see how much my belly had flattened. I couldn't understand what had happened right away. But as the reality slowly dawned on me, I couldn't help but bury my face in the pillow and sob quietly. Then I grabbed my phone from the bag within reach and impulsively called home. After a few rings, I realized what I was doing and quickly hung up, but a call came right back. Unable to move due to my condition, all I could do was lower the volume. Ignoring it wasn't an option. I switched to call mode and answered quietly, "Hello? Kristen?" It was Andrew's familiar voice.
I recognized it was your mobile number, but you hung up so quickly. What's going on?
Through tears, I slowly told Andrew on the other end of the phone that I had lost the second child. Andrew just listened in silence. When I calmed down a bit, he spoke slowly.
Sounds like you've had a tough time.
Andrew was still the kind person he always was.
Where are you now?
Sorry, I'm at the hospital. I can't move. I'm on the bed.
Got it. I guess a phone call isn't good then. I'll come right over. Which hospital are you at? Tell me?
I told him the name of the hospital, which I had learned from a nurse when I woke up. I also realized that I was relatively close by in a neighboring county.
Hold on for a bit. I'll be there soon.
Andrew's voice, even after 5 years, still brought me comfort. I wondered how he was doing now. Since we hadn't been in touch, if he had gotten married and had a wife, would I be intruding? These thoughts kept spinning in my head. And a few hours later, Andrew came to my hospital room. It seemed to be a large room, but there was hardly anyone else around. So when Andrew entered, I could barely sit up but managed to cry out to him.
What in the world happened?
Then I began to recount everything that had led up to this moment, sobbing through the story. Especially this pregnancy, which I had been extra careful with because of the previous one. Maybe I let my guard down feeling relieved that I could take a break, or maybe it was just the accumulation of fatigue. In any case, my body might have been signaling its limits. As much as to say that the life that was supposed to be there could no longer stay.
You've been through a lot,
Andrew said as he stroked my hair.
By the way, how's he doing? Hasn't he contacted you yet?
I shook my head no. I heard from the hospital staff that they contacted his office. So I've been waiting, but he hasn't shown up yet.
But you know, I'm kind of, well, actually pretty angry.
I started to apologize, but Andrew cut me off. Then my brother said, "No, that's not it. It's that you didn't show him to me first." Just that. I began to reply when the door to the hospital room opened again. "Hey Kristen, what in the world happened?" It was Nicholas. He glanced at me and muttered, again, clicking his tongue in annoyance. "And who is this? Don't tell me, you brought a man here?"
That's not it. Nicholas, this is my brother.
I started to say.
Hey.
Andrew stared intently at Nicholas, slightly furrowing his brow. What?
You got something to say to me?
No, Andrew narrowed his eyes and calmly said, "There's a woman with long, blood-soaked curly hair trying to hug you from behind. Do you know her?"
What are you talking about?
Nicholas looked startled at Andrew. Andrew pointed at Nicholas and said, "That's the person. She's wearing a big peridot ring on her right ring finger." Andrew's tone was light, as if he was discussing the weather. At that moment, Nicholas began to tremble violently. Finally, he must have understood what was being said to him.
What are you talking about?
Nicholas asked loudly, without regard for the setting.
Please keep it down. This is a hospital. And I'm just saying what I saw. Oh, the hair's gotten wet and the curls are tighter. She looks a bit younger than Kristen, maybe a college student? So, what exactly? So, that woman is clinging to your neck just like this, her bright red lips curled into a smile.
My brother explained, mimicking the gesture he saw, and Nicholas shuddered in response.
No, what are you saying? That's nonsense. I'm just telling you what I see. I don't know and don't care who she might be to you. Ugh.
Nicholas groaned at Andrew's words and hurriedly left the room.
What did you see again, Andrew?
Yeah, well, just like I said.
But, let me go make a call outside.
Just wait here a moment. Andrew left the room. So that's what Andrew saw. I sighed deeply. The reason I didn't want to introduce Nicholas to my brother before we got married might be due to my brother's nature, perhaps his psychic sensitivity. It was because of that trait of his. It's always been like that. My brother could always find things I'd lost quickly. He would sense if something unpleasant was lingering around me, and he even recognized when I was being isolated at school. He complained about needing sunglasses whenever we went near cemeteries for visits or other reasons. That was normal for me back then. But that very reason made me afraid of what he might say if he saw Nicholas, especially since my entire family was against him. Andrew sees through everything. That's why I might as well say I ran to a place beyond his gaze. Of course, that wasn't the only reason. Eventually, Andrew returned.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Where did you call? Well, we can talk about that later.
Then, with a serious look, Andrew asked, Do you really plan to continue with him? I stayed silent. I just kept gripping the blanket over and over.
It's tough, isn't it? Why don't you come back home?
But then, what about your place, Andrew? If I were to go back, it would be to my parents' house. And if Andrew were to inherit the house and if he were married, wouldn't I be an unwelcome sister-in-law?
Yeah, I'm still single. Really? You're still single? Yeah, with this condition, it's tough finding a woman without any hidden aspects.
Having the ability to see such things isn't always convenient.
When I walked into this room, I could immediately tell you weren't happy. There was a dark cloud around you. It reminded me of the time you were wrongly suspected and avoided by classmates. It's similar to that bad aura surrounding you now. You don't look happy at all.
Tears naturally started falling from my eyes again. I nodded heavily, yeah. I can't stand it anymore. I'm going to divorce him.
I thought maybe if we had a child it would be okay, but even if we did, it would have been pointless with the way things were. That's right. Probably, the child you were carrying was trying to tell you something, that this situation isn't right. So, come back home soon. I'll take care of things with him.
Take care of things? As I wiped my tears and tilted my head, Andrew confidently said, You'll see soon enough. After I was discharged, I went straight back to my parents' house. They seemed very surprised to see me after a long time. They might have wanted to scold me for eloping suddenly, but more than that, they were likely distressed by how thin and worn out I appeared. You've really been through a lot, my mother said as she hugged me. My father also added, You've certainly learned a lot about life. Since I needed to rest for a while, I submitted a request for a long-term leave at work. I even hinted that I might resign. Nicholas may have understood the possibility of divorce when he witnessed my second miscarriage firsthand.
Your company seems to have had some good people,
Andrew noted as he observed my responses.
Yes, that was the only place where I felt at peace.
I realized I had never been able to relax at home. Then a few days later, Nicholas showed up at my parents' house.
Sorry, but I know Kristen is there.
Please let her come out. My mother, who answered him first, firmly said, We cannot let Kristen come out to you. Then she added, However, we do have something to discuss with you.
And what might that be?
Nicholas took the bait.
To get straight to the point, we ask that you divorce Kristen. Is that Kristen's wish?
Yes, it is.
She currently does not want to see you.
While my mother spoke firmly, Nicholas walked into the drawing room as directed. I was listening from the next room. Nicholas sat heavily on the sofa in the drawing room, looking around nervously.
Couldn't take the lifestyle of a well-to-do lady, could she?
Nicholas began to slander me in front of my mother.
It's improper. To just abandon her husband and run back to her parents' house over this. To think she was raised to be such a wife.
My mother listened silently until a knock from behind the door prompted a yes in response. Then Andrew appeared.
Your turn, Andrew.
Yeah, leave the rest to me. At Andrew's entrance, Nicholas let out a small gasp.
You? Yeah, haven't seen you since that time at the hospital.
Nicholas tried to rise. But he couldn't. As he tried to stand up, Nicholas was forcefully held down by a strong grip on his shoulder. Just as my brother entered the room, security from our family, who had been stationed on the opposite side, near the door Nicholas came through, also made their presence known. Ours is a family of considerable standing, where it's fair to say staff are always on standby. As my mother stepped aside, my brother took a seat in front of Nicholas and began to speak.
Well, I have quite a few things I'd like to ask you. What are you talking about?
My brother glanced at Nicholas, who was being restrained, and pointed to his side.
Yeah, today, there's a woman who's been hugging you from the side. What are you talking about? Do you know this person?
Andrew then took out a photo of a woman and placed several copies on the table in front of Nicholas. He gasped again. Why do you have that? Nicholas started but then stopped himself.
I don't know this woman.
And he pretended as if he didn't know.
You don't know her? But you see, whether it's behind or beside you, I can see this lady's arms slowly tightening around your neck. You're totally unaware of it, aren't you? No, what are you even saying to me? Well, let's just say I tend to see things that others don't. But that alone isn't enough to prove you did anything to her. That's why I had our guys look into whether anyone knew this person.
He then showed a sketch he had drawn of the woman. Andrew can draw fairly well, which comes in handy when he needs to explain things he sees that are invisible to others. The sketch I saw was of a long-haired, blood-soaked woman with a resentful yet somehow smiling expression, entwined around Nicholas. There's more. When Andrew explained that her hair was wet, I asked what he meant, and he casually mentioned, well, probably this person isn't in this world anymore. To Andrew, seeing such things has been a part of his life since birth, so he discussed it matter-of-factly. As a child, this ability caused him trouble, but now he seems to accept it as just another part of who he is. Andrew continued to Nicholas.
I found out that this person has been missing.
Isn't that right?
I don't know her, I told you. And about this missing person.
Andrew ignored Nicholas's protests and continued.
I had it checked out. Here's the investigation report.
I also saw the report. After seeing the woman in the hospital, Andrew quickly contacted our family lawyer, who then reached out to the police. Of course, we didn't mention that Andrew can see people who are not visible to others. It was more about asking if they had any information because we think we know someone who might fit the description of a current situation. The police involvement might also relate to the influence our family has in this area. It turns out that the woman suddenly disappeared last year, and her family had filed a missing persons report. Incidentally, she lived near the condo we used to live in the neighboring county. I thought maybe Nicholas started seeing her during the days he didn't come home, using the savings we had built up.
So maybe that person?
I asked Andrew hesitantly when I heard the results of the investigation. Yeah, probably, Andrew replied ambiguously. And probably now, he was thinking of confronting Nicholas about it.
From about the year before last, you started spending more and going on trips frequently, didn't you? That's strictly our personal business. It has nothing to do with you. It does matter. My sister saved up that money, and you ended up spending it on that woman, right?
Nicholas seemed increasingly irritated by Andrew's calm demeanor.
That's a matter between spouses.
Well, that includes why we want you to divorce Kristen now.
No, that would be inconvenient for me.
Nicholas flatly refused.
Why?
I guess I know, because it would mean one less breadwinner, right? Nicholas clicked his tongue again. After a moment of thought, he said, I might agree to the divorce, but how about you give me something in return, as he made a circle with his fingers.
What, are you asking for money to agree to the divorce?
Well, yes.
You guys have been against it all along, haven't you?
Kristen couldn't return home because of that.
I didn't mind divorcing, but I felt bad for making her homeless, so I stayed married to her.
Hearing this, I almost felt sick. While I had been quietly waiting for him, all this time he thought this way.
Basically, you came uninvited. Because of that, I even had to change my job. Ever since, things have only gotten worse. Don't you think I deserve something for all the trouble you've caused?
Well, maybe, if you were a decent person. What did you say? Nicholas started to get up, but Andrew restrained him by the shoulders, preventing him from standing.
I told you I had it investigated, right?
Then Andrew turned towards the door. That's when the police officers, who had been waiting, came into view.
What? Why are the police here? Didn't I tell you I had it investigated?
You're a bit careless.
But maybe it's better if you're caught here. Otherwise, that woman's arm will keep tightening around your neck, along with her hair, and it will end up strangling you.
She looks quite furious, you know.
What do you mean by that?
Andrew looked sideways and nodded several times, then said, Oh, so this peridot ring is a fake. She realized that during a trip and confronted you about it, and you lost your temper.
Shut up. Whether it was real or fake, you were satisfied when it happened.
Nicholas inadvertently confessed. Caught in his own words, the waiting police officers stepped forward, holding out their badges.
We need to ask you about the disappearance and possible unlawful disposal of Shannon Brown. We'll need you to come to the station.
The security let go of Nicholas, and he was handed over to the police. I finally felt like I could breathe. Then, I slowly walked into the room.
Hey, Kristen! Were you listening all this time? I won't allow a divorce.
It doesn't matter what you say, I've already decided.
After all, you never took seriously the fact that I lost our child.
Both times, even the second miscarriage, Nicholas only glanced briefly at my sunken belly. I truly regret choosing you. Nicholas choked on his words.
What was I even doing? I wasted my time, energy, and money on someone like you.
Ridiculous. Seemingly surprised by my outspokenness, Nicholas gaped at me.
Goodbye. We won't meet again, I'll let the lawyers handle everything from here. Wait, Kristen, hey!
Let's go, please. Nicholas still seemed to want to say something, but the police ushered him away. Following the police interrogation, Nicholas confessed. The missing Shannon Brown was a student living nearby. The younger woman, who met Nicholas through a sugar daddy arrangement, apparently wanted to marry him. She had been pressing for a divorce between us. Nicholas probably still saw me as a financial resource. His ultimate goal during this latest incident at my parents' home might have been to extort money by using the divorce as leverage. However, for Nicholas, Shannon Brown was nothing more than a fling, without any further use. During a trip to the mountains, they argued about a fake ring, and when he forcefully pushed her away, she fell and severely hit her head. It might have just been an accident, but what Nicholas did next was not. He dragged Shannon to the edge of a cliff and pushed her off. Because the mountain was outside the usual search areas, Shannon's whereabouts became unknown, complicating the search efforts. Later, based on Nicholas's statements, Shannon was discovered buried under grass near a spring in the mountains. Nicholas was arrested again, and it was certain he would serve a long sentence. Through my lawyer, I managed to get Nicholas to sign the divorce papers, and I was finally free. I'll be going now.
Take care. Do your best.
Encouraged by my mother's voice, I took my first step towards a new job. For a while, I completely quit the company I had been working at to rest my mind and body, and returned to my parents' home. Once I felt more stable physically and emotionally, I started looking for a new job. The 5 years of living might have toughened me up a bit, given my sheltered upbringing. I'd like to think I've become more resilient than during my initial office life. But for now, I think I'm done with marriage. Especially considering the fact that I've lost 2 pregnancies. For now, I want to stay away from marriage and pregnancy. Andrew is waiting for the shadows around me to clear and for a peaceful atmosphere to return. I don't know what the future holds, but this time, I want to live while taking good care of myself and those around me.
I got a transfer at work, so we're gonna move next month. Does that mean I have to transfer schools?
I threw this direct question at my parents. Then my mom burst out laughing and said,
"It's just me, your dad, and your sister moving. We don't need a monster in the house."
I was at a loss for words over such harsh comments that seemed unbelievable coming from my own parents.
"You embarrass us. Only your perfectly healthy sister is our child."
When my father's transfer was confirmed, my parents, thinking of me as a burden because I was born without one arm, disappeared with just my sister. A few months later, I was left in the care of my grandparents.
"Well then, Dad and Mom, please take good care of Kristen from now on."
Goodbye, Kristen. Despite the unlikely chance of seeing each other often, my parents left me with my grandparents as if they were just going on a 3-day trip. After seeing off my father, mother, and sister, I broke down in tears. Seeing this, my grandfather said, "Don't worry. They're the ones who'll regret this." 8 years later, I would come to understand the meaning of my grandfather's words. My name is Kristen. I am currently 26 years old. I've been living with my grandparents for the past 8 years. Today's lunch is your favorite sandwich. My grandma is a great cook, and among her dishes, her sandwich is my absolute favorite. Her homemade sauce is out of this world. Yay! Thanks, Grandma. It's delicious, I said with a smile. After finishing his meal early, my grandfather asked, "Aren't you going to play chess with me today, Kristen?" "I will after I finish Grandma's meal." "Just wait a bit." This is how it always is with my kind and talented cook of a grandmother and my chess-loving grandfather. It's not that my parents got divorced or died in a car accident. Both of them are alive and well, living happily with my sister. The main reason I live apart from my family is probably because of my arm. I was born without a left arm. It's a congenital condition. Having been born this way, I've never really felt it was a handicap. This is normal for me. But even though I see it that way, others reacted differently. In kindergarten, some children would cry when they saw my arm. In elementary school, when I went to school, kids would shout, "A monster with only one arm is here," or "She's not normal, she's a monster," and so on. Perhaps because of this, I didn't make any friends in kindergarten or elementary school. It wasn't that I was blatantly mistreated, but everyone treated me as if I were untouchable. Once I reached junior high school, my peers began to understand me better, and the teasing stopped. I even started making a few friends. However, some parents of my classmates often said, "That poor girl, missing an arm." I'm not pitiful. This is my uniqueness, I would loudly say now. But back then, I resigned myself to thinking there was nothing I could do about it. Yet, there was one person who always supported me. My older sister Angela. Angela was smart, kind, and fashionable. Every morning I struggled to button up my school uniform shirt with one arm. She'd say, "Let me do that for you," and helped me get dressed. After school, Angela always walked home with me, carrying my bag and offering her scarf saying, "Here, it's cold, take this," always looking after me first. What I loved most was when Angela did my hair. "There, your hair looks cute now. I tried braids today."
"Thank you. Wow, I'm so happy. You're amazing, sis. You should be a hairdresser in the future."
I would look in the mirror repeatedly, my eyes sparkling, while Angela proudly grinned. Being of that age, I was interested in fashion, but doing my own hair was a challenge with one arm, and I was always happy when Angela made it look cute. Most of all, I was happy because Angela seemed to enjoy doing it. We would watch our favorite idols on YouTube, draw pictures, play pretend, a truly close pair of sisters. But my impression of our parents was a bit different. Both of my parents cared deeply about appearances. From a young age, Angela and I were constantly told how girls should be, to the point it became grating. Dad would buy expensive cars to look good, and Mom dressed in beautiful clothes. Despite not being a wealthy family, my parents always stretched beyond their means, often grumbling about money at home. They also gossiped about neighbors, that person is divorced, or that child went to a good college, always overly concerned with appearances. Perhaps for them, my existence wasn't something to celebrate. Now I can bathe alone, but as a young child in elementary school, I couldn't. Either Angela or my parents would bathe me daily, washing my body and hair. Bathing with Angela was fun because she talked a lot, but with my parents, it was different. "All right, let's wash your hair," they'd say and roughly scrub my head. Sometimes their nails would hurt, or they'd leave soap in my hair, always careless. After washing, they'd throw a towel at me and leave without a word. At home, I could manage drinks from easy pour packets or the water dispenser, but when we were out, I sometimes drank bottled water. If I asked Dad to open it, he'd click his tongue before reluctantly helping me. Whenever I asked for help, he'd mutter, "What a hassle." I tried to accept it, but it still made me sad. Yet, I never disliked my parents. "What shall we do today?" "What would you like to eat, Angela?" "I'd like pasta." It's easy for Kristen to eat too. On Sundays, our family of 4 often dined out. I was indecisive and struggled to choose what to eat, so Dad and Mom and Angela usually picked the place. I watch with a smile as the 3 of them discuss what they feel like eating, saying things like "I want to eat this" and "I'm in the mood for this today." While I enjoyed eating delicious food outside, what I cherished most was the time spent eating together as a family, happily facing one another. One day, while at a restaurant, I overheard a family seated next to us.
"Mom, why doesn't that person have an arm?"
It was a scorching hot day, and I was wearing short sleeves, which made my missing arm immediately noticeable. The child seemed genuinely curious. They spoke loud enough for us to hear. Then, what appeared to be the child's mother began to explain.
"Hey, that person has a medical condition. Missing an arm is scary. Why don't they have it? Everyone normally has 2 arms. Why don't they?"
"You shouldn't stare like that. They aren't normal, that's why they don't have an arm," the mother said. "It's common for people seeing my arm for the first time to whisper about it." But internally, I felt a bit down, thinking, "Not normal? Well, this is normal for me." Hearing this, my sister Angela said, "Kristen, don't worry about it. You're no different from anyone else. Here, your favorite salmon, eat up," comforting me kindly. I tried to hide my feelings, but Angela could tell. Contrastingly, my parents began, "It's embarrassing, Kristen. Try to hide it more when we're out, right? You attract too much attention. We need to book a private room when you're with us." They were always overly concerned with appearances. This response wasn't surprising. But Angela scolded them, "Mom, Dad, how can you say that?" I was happy Angela stood up for me, but I didn't want her to fight with our parents because of me, so I intervened. "It's okay, sis, thanks. But I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. I'll be more careful next time." "That's good. Eat up." "Okay." Angela looked skeptical, but I pretended nothing was wrong and continued eating. However, from that day on, I seemed to be left out of family outings. "All right, let's go. Kristen, you stay home." I was left home alone. At first, Angela thought it was just a coincidence that she didn't come, but as the weeks passed and it continued, she asked, "Hey, Mom, Dad, why has Kristen been staying home lately?" With a slightly pained expression, they replied, "Remember at the restaurant, the family next to us made fun of her?" It seemed to really hurt Kristen. Kristen's a girl of her age. If she doesn't want to go, we can't force her, blatantly lying. Still unyielding, Angela suggested, then let's stop going out and order takeout to eat at home together. It's more fun with Kristen around. Her words made me tear up a bit. She really is a caring sister. But my parents countered, Angela, if we said we're not going because of Kristen, wouldn't that make her feel worse? Exactly. It'd be sad if Kristen couldn't act normally. Right, Kristen? They looked at me sharply, pressuring me. Angela, standing behind my mother, couldn't see her face. Frightened by my mother's demonic expression, I shrank back. You shouldn't defy your parents. I can't live on my own. I have to endure, to give the response my parents want. Feeling this way, I bit my lip hard and said with a forced smile, yeah, I hated being teased the other day. It's embarrassing when people stare. I'm more comfortable just watching TV at home, so don't worry about me, sis. Is that so? All right. Angela seemed reluctantly convinced. Satisfied, my parents left the house with Angela. After they left, I tried to make a microwave pie by myself but struggled even to open the package. Why can't I even do this? I thought, as tears started to fall. From that day, my parents learned that I would comply without talking back if pressured, and they stopped taking me out not just for meals but also for shopping and trips. Is Kristen not going again? Looking sad, Angela glanced at our parents before saying to me, yeah. I'm sorry. I was often left with our grandparents during trips. My grandfather runs an IT company. Grandpa always lets me use the computer, and Grandma cooks delicious meals, making sure I have everything I need. I find such times enjoyable and refreshing. But the excuses my parents made to leave me behind were terrifying. Sorry, Mom. Kristen keeps saying she doesn't want to go on trips. Can you spend a few days with her? Sorry for always being a burden. Angela is fine, but Kristen is becoming more rebellious. Please take care of her for a few days. Saying that, I was scared of my parents, who always seemed to lie to my grandparents as naturally as breathing. Yet, I never denied their lies. All right. We don't mind. We'll take good care of Kristen. Have fun and take care. My grandparents said with smiles as they saw Angela off and warmly welcomed me. I waved goodbye to the three of them with a smile that held no real feeling. This had become the usual routine before family trips. One day, noticing my forced smile, my grandfather asked, Kristen, are you really okay with not going? Yeah, I'm fine. I'd rather stay here with you and Grandma than go on trips, I said, trying to sound brave. But that was the truth. At first, I felt lonely being the only one not going on trips, but lately, I feel more at ease staying with my kind grandparents than with my parents. That's good. Grandpa and Grandma are always happy when you're here, Kristen. Come anytime. And if something bothers you, always talk to us, he encouraged me. At that moment, I didn't want to talk deeply about my parents. The thought of discussing them scared me, as it might make all my emotions come pouring out, and I didn't even know how to answer if asked deeply about it. So, I was grateful they let me be. Reflecting on it now, my grandfather must have sensed my reluctance and always made it easy for me to talk to them. Despite this, my parents continued to treat me coldly. Whenever people came over, they would say, "It's embarrassing to have you around, stay in your room," or even on the hottest days they would command, "Wear long sleeves when you go out so nobody sees your arm." To them, my existence was something embarrassing, something to be ashamed of. But I had Angela. That's what kept me going. However, even Angela, my only real support, was eventually taken away by our parents.
Kristen, this is too much. I'm done.
Angela suddenly said one day, and she stopped doing my hair. She also stopped helping me with my shirts in the morning, only silently assisting with things I absolutely couldn't do by myself. Being treated coldly by Angela was even more painful than by my parents. If Angela abandons me, I will lose my place in this home. I decided to confront Angela directly. Angela, did I do something wrong?
Why do you ask?
Lately, you've seemed cold. Did I upset you somehow? Don't you know?
You know everything.
With that, Angela slammed the door and went to the living room by herself. I had no clue what she was angry about. Then, my mother came to me.
Kristen, did you upset your sister?
Yeah, but I don't know why.
Oh, playing dumb now, huh? Weren't you calling her the helper behind her back? After all she's done for you, that's pretty low.
Disgusted by my mother emphasizing my disability, I denied it. What? No, I never said that. I love Angela. I'm grateful to her, and I would never say such a thing. It was me.
I told her you said that to your friends at school, so I got angry on her behalf.
Naturally, she's upset. My mother's eerie smile sent shivers down my spine.
Oh, I see.
I realized then. My parents must be feeding Angela lies to ruin our relationship. To her, our parents are kind and important. And she believes what they say. From then on, even when I tried to talk to her, Angela was cold. Not knowing what lies my parents had told her, I couldn't defend myself, and the rift between us deepened over time. Before, Angela would do things for me without being asked, but now she wouldn't unless I asked her directly. Gradually, it became harder to rely on her, and I truly felt like I had no one on my side. It became difficult even to go to the living room, and I spent most of my time in my room. As usual, I stay home alone on weekends. My sister Angela and my parents go out to eat and shop without me. We bought so much today. Everyone on social media will be shocked by these clothes. My mother said, flaunting an expensive-looking dress. The food was delicious today. Where shall we go next week? My father returned home cheerfully. It seemed like they were deliberately showing me how happy they were without me. But Angela was different. You should buy something too, Angela. I don't need anything. She always declined and never got anything for herself. Perhaps she felt guilty about getting something when I couldn't. Though we had grown apart, it seemed she still cared about me. We both should have talked openly, but we were both afraid to hear the truth, so we never had a real conversation. Thus, time passed without repairing our relationship. When I turned 17 and my sister Angela turned 18, I became fairly independent and could manage most things on my own without much help. At that time, I was going to school and also visiting and helping out at my grandfather's company. Angela was planning to attend a vocational school next year. She seems to be attending a vocational school in another state, which is quite far from where we live. One day, my parents suddenly spoke to me. Kristen, we need to talk. They said with serious faces, giving me a bad feeling. That day, Angela was out at work and not at home.
I got a transfer.
We're going to move.
Really? When? Do I have to change schools?
Taken aback by the sudden news, I bombarded my dad with questions. I had finally made some friends, and with graduation approaching, the thought of transferring schools made me feel a bit anxious. Then, my mom burst out laughing.
Kristen, you seem to be misunderstanding, but you're not coming with us.
It's just me, your dad, and Angela.
What? What do you mean? Angela is going to a vocational school next year, right? And your dad's new job is also in the same state.
So, it's just us going. We're selling this house too.
Then where am I supposed to live?
You'll live with your grandparents.
We've already told them. That way, you don't have to transfer schools. But...
No buts, my dad suddenly yelled.
How long do you plan to keep causing us trouble? We're fine with just your able-bodied sister. It's embarrassing to be seen with you.
That's right, we don't need a monster who isn't normal in this house. I was speechless from the cruel words that I couldn't believe came from my own parents. I always suspected they felt this way about me, that they didn't really like me. But hearing it said to my face felt like being stabbed in the heart with a sword. A few months later.
Well, Dad and Mom, please take good care of Kristen.
Goodbye, Kristen. Despite the likelihood that we wouldn't see each other often, they left me with my grandparents as if they were just going on a 3-day trip. Angela glanced at me occasionally, seeming concerned but said nothing. I waved at them with a smile as usual. But as soon as they were out of sight, I couldn't hold back my tears anymore.
What's wrong, Kristen?
My grandfather asked, surprised to see his usually cheerful granddaughter crying.
Didn't you want to be apart from your dad and mom? Yes, I didn't want to be separated from Angela, but I did want to be away from dad and mom.
My grandparents looked at each other, shocked. Apparently realizing what was happening.
What did they say to you?
They said they don't need a monster.
How terrible. I can't believe it, it's just too much.
Both were shocked and saddened. This was the first time I had ever spoken about my parents, and it felt like a dam had burst inside me, unleashing a flood of tears. Seeing me like this, my grandfather stood up as if he had made a decision.
Kristen, it's okay. You don't have to worry about anything. They are the ones who will regret this.
Huh? It took me 8 years to understand what my grandfather meant by those words. 8 years after being abandoned by my parents. I now live with my grandparents at 26 years old. My grandfather has retired but still supports the company as a chairman. I started working at his company right after high school graduation. Angela finished vocational school and started living on her own while working. Living with my grandparents, I grew up free from discrimination and thrived. But as if to disrupt this peaceful life, a storm arrived suddenly.
It's been a long time.
8 years, right?
Kristen, you've grown up.
The familiar, unwelcome voices made my skin crawl. These were the voices of the parents who had abandoned me. They had always received financial support from my grandparents. Because my grandfather ran a successful company and had the means to help, thinking of his grandchildren. Indeed, reflecting on it, it was strange how my ordinary parents could afford such luxuries. It seems they were using the money my grandparents gave for the sake of their grandchildren. However, the financial support stopped when Angela graduated from her school. For a while, my parents kept calling my grandparents asking for money, but eventually, my grandparents blocked them completely and stopped responding. Unable to maintain their lavish lifestyle without the support, my parents had accrued debts and struggled financially. Then they saw me on TV. I became the CEO of a company at the age of 26. Although it was a small company with just a few employees, I had started my own business using the experience I gained at my grandfather's company. Because of my early success, I was now featured on television and YouTube. And my parents, having seen on TV that I had become a CEO, thought they could perhaps regain the lifestyle they had when they received support from my grandparents by asking me for help, so they came all this way.
Kristen, I heard you became a CEO?
Sitting in such a fancy office, in that boss's chair, you're so cheeky. 8 years without contact, and upon their sudden return, they barged into my office with such audacity.
Yeah, what do you want?
I asked with a sigh.
We're out of money and in trouble.
You're a CEO, right? Give us some money.
What? Grandma and Grandpa stopped supporting us, and we've run out of savings. Please, we're begging you, give us a share, even just a little.
No matter how many years pass, these people never change, I thought, utterly disappointed. I don't have any money to give you, I pushed back firmly.
What? After we raised you, the least you could do is give us some money. That's right. After all the trouble we went through raising someone like you, you're so ungrateful.
Raised me?
You gave up on raising me because I was disabled.
If this had been me as a student, I might have been too scared of my parents to resist giving them money. But I'm not that person anymore.
Really bold of you to say that.
You've always treated me terribly. I have nothing to say to you, can you please leave?
What? How dare you speak to us like that? This is an order. Give us the money.
They demanded, as if trying to extort me. But I would not be intimidated.
If you keep this up, I'll call the police. Don't ever come near me or my grandparents again.
I warned them, dialing 911 on my phone to show them I was serious. The word police remains a frightening threat at any age.
Fine. We'll ask Angela then. We were fools to rely on a monster like you.
They scoffed, storming out of my office. Just then, someone stopped my parents.
Mom, Dad, what are you trying to ask me?
Angela. They were shocked to see my sister, who they did not expect to be there, and were speechless.
Next you ask me for money after Kristen, after you already tried our grandparents. I don't have any money to give to toxic parents like you.
Toxic parents! They never expected such words from Angela. Their faces paled as they processed her words.
I've known everything since 8 years ago when you separated from Kristen. I was shocked to learn how awful you were. At first, I was devastated, but relieved to hear Kristen never said anything bad about me.
That's not true. She did say bad things, right, Dad?
Yeah, Kristen always used to speak poorly of Angela.
They lied, still trying to manipulate the situation. But Angela no longer believed their words.
Still lying, how despicable. Well, I don't care. When I graduated from vocational school and realized I didn't have to live with you anymore, I was overjoyed.
In fact, after we separated, I had told my grandparents about the rift with Angela, and they had explained everything to her. Thanks to them, any misunderstandings between us were cleared up, and we returned to being as close as we had been before. I had even offered Angela a job at my company, but she chose to pursue her dream of being a hairdresser, which she had since she was young. Still, she visits my company occasionally after work. Today, Angela was at my company after her shift when our parents loudly barged in. We had been talking, and to surprise our parents, I had Angela step out of the room.
Why are you two together? Kristen and I are still close. I don't want anything to do with parents who call their own daughter a monster.
Me neither.
I don't want anything to do with you ever again.
No way! As our parents hesitated to leave the office, our grandparents arrived and said, "Our grandchildren don't want you here. Leave now. And we also will never interact with you again. Got it?" They scolded them with fury. While my grandfather stood boldly, my grandmother started chanting, "Evil's out, get out." It was such a surreal scene that Angela and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. Eventually, our parents were driven out and disowned by both our grandparents and us. I don't know where they are or what they're doing now, but when they stormed into my company, they were already burdened with debt, so I'm sure they're living a tough life. Curious, I asked my grandfather, "Hey, Grandpa, how did you know 8 years ago that my parents would regret their actions?" "Kristen, you've been coming to my company since you were a student, right? Even back then, I knew you were smart and quick to understand, always thinking on your feet. I always thought you'd grow up to be someone who could lead others," he explained. It warmed my heart to realize Grandpa had always been watching over me. "Thank you."
"Oh, it's nothing. All of this is the fruit of your own hard work. You really did well."
His words made me tear up again. A few days later, I was at Angela's hair salon. "I feel like a change, maybe a shortcut." "A shortcut for you? That's rare. Want to keep your usual beige color?" "Yeah, that's fine. Make it cute, okay?"
"Got it,"
she said, and started cutting my hair. I had always thought Angela was meant to be a hairdresser since we were kids, and even now, as adults, she still made my hair look great. She truly is a wonderful person.
"There, all done. Look how cute it turned out,"
Angela said proudly, making her signature proud face like she used to. "Thank you, Angela." And like this, Angela and I remained close sisters.
Mom and my sister are living with us too. If you don't like it, sleep in the yard.
Mike, with a sly and hideous grin, seemed to say, "You can't really do that, can you?" For Mike, I'm just a convenient wife, and it's an everyday occurrence for him to throw such demeaning words at me. But I can't take it anymore.
Then I'll start sleeping outside from today. Don't complain about who I sleep with.
At my words, Mike scoffed. However, the next morning, Mike, seeing the yard, went into a half-crazed state and regretted what he had said. My name is Sarah, a 42-year-old freelance illustrator. At this age, I've built a career and can make a decent living working from home. I lived in the city with my husband, Mike. We didn't have kids and enjoyed our carefree life as a couple. I really wanted children, but Mike hated kids and insisted on not having any. However, Tina, my mother-in-law, wouldn't try to understand our situation.
A wife who can't bear children is useless. A generation ago, you would have been divorced without complaint,
she would say with a sly grin every time we visited her house. Holly, my sister-in-law, was just as sarcastic as her mother.
Freelance illustrator? That's just an extension of child's play, right? Getting paid for doodling. I'm jealous. But you're not really earning much, just leeching off my brother. After all, you're just a high school grad. There's a big difference between you and me, a college grad.
She said this without knowing how much I earn. For the record, I make about as much as Mike, who works full-time. During busy periods, I even earn more than him. Holly, looking down on me for my education level, tries to take an educational high ground, but she herself is not currently in a stable job. She claims she could land a full-time job anytime she really tries, but at 35, it's about time she got serious, I think. The only decent one is my father-in-law, who would immediately defend me whenever I was ridiculed by the two.
Sarah is a precious person to us. Don't say such disrespectful things to someone who has come to our family.
Thanks to him, the two would quiet down for a while. But, disliking that my father-in-law was on my side, they would later secretly make life difficult for me. It's a vicious cycle, but I'm saved by my father-in-law's presence. If there's one good thing, it's that my in-laws' house is miles away, so we don't meet often. Normally, it's harmless, so I brush off their sarcastic comments. One day, while I was working at home as usual.
What? Your father passed away?
Mike suddenly called during work with this shocking news. Apparently, his illness had progressed without us knowing. With funeral preparations and other duties, I had no time to grieve in the rush of those days. I couldn't return home for a while because my mother-in-law and Holly left all the troublesome matters to me. I was exhausted in just a few days, overwhelmed by all the paperwork when someone passes away. Somehow, after managing to see my father-in-law off, I returned home and thought I could finally take time to grieve.
But now, only Mom and my sister are left at home. I'm worried about the two, so we're moving to my hometown. What? You can't just spring that on me. What about work?
Then, Mike, looking smug, made an outrageous statement.
Don't worry, my friend runs a company back home and he's agreed to hire me. I've already settled everything. You work from home, so it shouldn't matter where you live, right? There's no problem, so relax.
Mike had arranged everything without my knowledge. Afterward, ignoring my reluctance, Mike proceeded with the moving preparations. I reluctantly started preparing to move as well. Initially, Mike insisted on living with his parents, but I firmly refused and decided to stay in this house. Eventually, we contracted a condo a bit away from his parents' home and started a new life there. But after moving, my mother-in-law and Holly, having nothing better to do, would come to our house and interfere with my work. Neither of them works, so they seem to have time to spare. I've hinted several times that it's troublesome if they come too often, but I've been too indirect, and it seems they haven't gotten the message. Nearly every day, those two come to my house and do as they please. But that's not the only stress. When the neighbors see me, they whisper among themselves.
People from the city stand out, don't they? Sarah, you stick out. You need to make an effort to blend in a bit.
When I discussed this with Mike, the two of them happened to be there and made a snide remark.
Do I really stick out?
It's stressful enough dealing with Tina and Holly, but it seems like I have no allies around here. I sighed deeply, regretting moving to such a place. That day, Holly and Tina came to the condo for no reason.
Don't you have any snacks in this house? Such an inconsiderate daughter-in-law. We are guests, you know? It's normal to have something prepared.
Tina rummaged through the cabinets, complaining non-stop. How can I stand such selfish guests? I sighed inwardly. Holly sat down in a chair with poor manners and said to me,
"Hey Sarah, give me some money." "What?" "I'm going to hang out with a friend and we're going to a theme park. So, I need you to give me money for the trip."
Unabashedly begging for money, I was so appalled that I retorted,
"Why don't you start working seriously and earn your own money? Then you'd have more to spend freely."
Holly exploded at my words. She stood up from the chair, banging the table as she yelled at me.
"Are you preaching to me? A low-life high school grad like you lecturing me, a college grad, is a million years too early. Know your place."
Then Tina, who was listening, let out a deliberately loud sigh.
"That's right, Holly's right. Really, a daughter-in-law acting so high and mighty. After all, the money you're so reluctant to share is earned by our son, right? It's not your money to be so proud about."
Tina puffed her chest out as if she had made a valid point. "It seems they know nothing. Mike has just switched jobs to a company run by a schoolmate back in his hometown, and his salary has decreased. Thus, the allowance Holly is demanding would have to come from my wallet. But explaining this to them would surely be in vain."
"I'm sorry, but I'm busy, so please go back home now."
Despite their continued grumbling, I somehow managed to send them away. As they left with loud footsteps, I sighed deeply, and then the neighbor emerged from the next room with an annoyed expression.
"Could you please keep it down a bit?"
"Oh. Sorry." It wasn't me who was being loud, but I had inconvenienced the neighbor because of them. I had been trying to live quietly without causing any trouble. I sighed deeply once again. A few hours later, I reported today's events to Mike when he returned home.
"There are always neighbor issues with the condo, right?" "No, that's not the issue."
I was about to ask him to talk to the two, but Mike interrupted me with a big smile and said something unbelievable.
"I've been thinking this house is too small, haven't you?"
"Well,
so, I went ahead and bought a house with a yard."
Mike said it so casually, as if he had just picked up some sweets on the way home. I was so taken aback that I couldn't comprehend his words for a moment.
"You bought a house? Wait, what do you mean?"
"It was a second-hand house, selling cheap.
I managed to buy it with my savings."
After that, I bombarded Mike with questions about when he had made such a big purchase and why he hadn't consulted me first. But it seemed to have no effect on him. He was too excited about owning our home and casually brushed off my lecturing. I was so frustrated I nearly grabbed my head, but what's done is done. And, as Mike said, we were feeling cramped in this condo, so living in a house might be better, I convinced myself. A few days later, we moved from the condo to the newly purchased house. However, we were greeted by Tina and Holly, who were also there moving in.
"What's going on?"
When I confronted Mike with a trembling voice, he responded nonchalantly.
"Oh, didn't I mention? Both Mom and my sister will live here too. The old house was getting too run down, so we're demolishing it and just selling the land. The construction contract is already in place, and the land sale is underway." "Wait, why didn't you tell me?"
Dizzy from the unbelievable reality in front of me, I held my head as Mike casually opened his mouth.
"Well then, I'll say it now. Mom and my sister are moving in too. If you don't like it, sleep in the yard."
Mike grinned maliciously, as if saying, "You can't really do that, can you?" At that moment, seeing his vile smile, something inside me snapped.
"Then I'll start sleeping outside from today. Don't complain about who I sleep with, okay? Like I would complain. Do as you please."
Watching our argument, the two onlookers laughed and chimed in.
"Great. Now the nuisance is gone. We'll have more room in the house. Why don't you just go back to your parents' house?"
Ignoring the two laughing mockingly, I moved my belongings to the yard. Then, to prepare for sleeping outdoors, I made a call to someone. The next day.
"Oh, I slept well."
I stretched mightily in the yard of the house Mike had bought. it felt like I had slept well for the first time in a long time. After I moved my belongings out to the yard, Mike spitefully closed all the curtains in the house. So it seems he didn't know I was in the yard. However, he can't keep the curtains closed forever. As morning arrived, Mike opened the house curtains. And upon seeing the yard, his face was a picture of shock.
What is that? Well, you said I shouldn't complain about who I sleep with, right?
Mike, trembling, pointed next to me and exclaimed,
Who brings such a huge dog into our yard?
My pet dog, referred to as the huge dog, wagged its tail in response. This dog is a Rottweiler, a breed classified as a giant dog. And I had set up a giant tent in the yard, brought from my parents' home, and spent the night there with my dog. The person I had called was my mother. I explained the situation to her and borrowed the tent and my pet from my parents' home to spend the night here. It would have been enough to just borrow the tent, but since I had the opportunity to camp out in the spacious yard, and it was a perfect chance for my large-bodied pet to have a great time, I took it. My dog loves spending time outdoors, and as I expected, was in high spirits all of yesterday. I too had a fun night and was in a good mood from the morning. However, Mike was pale and clearly not in a good mood.
That's your parents' dog, right? Take it back to their house now.
Yes, Mike has a significant fear of large dogs. Bringing my pet was partly to get back at Mike. Mike had been chased by a large dog when he was young, and ever since, he has been scared at the mere sight of them. Because of this, my brother had to take the dog out whenever my parents greeted Mike, but let's set that story aside. And as Mike yelled, Tina and Holly, rubbing their sleepy eyes, came out to the yard.
What's going on, Mike, yelling so early in the morning? Why is there a dog in our house?
The two let out pitiful cries. Both of them disliked dogs, and had made faces just at the mention that my parents' house had a large dog. Now that the dog had suddenly appeared in front of them, they seemed quite flustered. Together with Mike, they became nearly hysterical, shouting for the dog to get out of the house.
What are you thinking? This is why I can't believe how awful low-educated high school grads are. I never thought I had such a crazy daughter-in-law. Who does something like this? You're right. What are you thinking? Have you gone mad?
As I stayed silent, the three of them continued to berate me.
It's noisy this early in the morning, don't you think?
I asked while petting my dog, who wagged its tail vigorously. This dog, although large, has a calm demeanor, is very intelligent and kind. However, it shows no mercy to anyone who threatens its family.
Can't you hear us telling you to get out?
As Mike hurled these thorny words, my dog growled next to me. When Mike heard the sound, he let out a pathetic scream, and then there was a noise coming from the large tent where I had been sleeping.
It's lively this morning, isn't it?
Dad, good morning.
What?
The person who emerged from the tent was my father. Mike, not expecting my father to be there, exclaimed in astonishment. Hey, Mike.
Good morning.
My father said with a smile, greeting him in the morning, but Mike just stood there with his mouth agape. I'm hungry.
Bro, you ate a ton yesterday.
Then my brother came out of the tent. He's married and usually lives elsewhere, but after hearing my story yesterday.
Then, let's take this chance to camp out in the yard as a family. If anything happens, we're all here, so you'll be safe, right?
That's why we decided to camp as a family. Good morning.
It seems my daughter has been quite the trouble for you.
The last to come out was my mother. While she had a fresh smile appropriate for the morning, her eyes were not smiling. When I told her the situation yesterday, she was the angriest. While she doesn't make a big fuss like Mike's folks, my mother harbors her anger deep within. As evidence, her gaze towards my in-laws was ice cold.
Oh, long time no see.
The vigor Mike had earlier was gone, and he twitched the corners of his mouth, trying to force a smile. Mike is bold towards me but can't stand up to my father and brother. The reason is both are quite muscular, and Mike is intimidated by them. My father is a muscular former police officer who still works out daily even after retiring. Last year, he even won a triathlon competition, so he's confident in his physical strength. And my brother is a police officer, who normally ensures the safety of the town. Influenced heavily by our father, he also works out whenever he gets a chance. His wife and daughter are amazed at how much he exercises, but to me, he's a dependable brother. The family dog that my father and brother take for walks is also incredibly muscular. Having kept up with their intense exercise regimen since he was a puppy, it's a natural result.
Well, although I have a lot to say, first, thank you for lending us your yard. Thanks to that, we had a great time as a family without any need for water.
My mother said politely. Surrounded by muscular men, my mother actually holds the highest position in our family hierarchy. The dog is most attached to her and recognizes her as the leader of the pack. Even now, he sat obediently by her side. Both my brother and father always say they can't beat my mother, no matter how much they exercise. While my mother doesn't have physical strength, she shows her strength when it really matters. Once, when I was bullied by a classmate in elementary school, my mother immediately confronted the teacher and dragged the bully's parents to the school.
Enough with the excuses. I'm asking for a reason why you did such things to my daughter. Now, please don't hesitate to explain.
My mother maintained a smile throughout, but her presence was formidable, and eventually, the bully's parents and the child themselves started crying. That was when I vowed never to anger my mother. If I had consulted my family before things got to this point, my parents and brother would have supported me. But I didn't want to worry my family. I wanted to reassure everyone that I was happily married. So even when I was harassed by my mother-in-law and Holly, Mike decided to move without consulting me. When I called my mother yesterday, she was both angry and worried over the phone.
You've always been patient, but I can't bear to see you suffer like this. After all, you are my precious daughter.
I'm a fully grown adult, not a child who needs to be coddled by her mother. But hearing those words, I nearly cried and deeply regretted not consulting her sooner. And now, my mother confronted my in-laws with the same smile she had when facing that bully's parents. My mother and in-laws had only really spoken during our first meeting and at the wedding. Since then, they hadn't met much, so they probably never thought she could be so intimidating.
I've heard everything you said about my daughter from inside the tent. Calling her an uneducated high school grad, saying she's crazy. Now, what was your intention with those harsh words?
Please, enlighten us. Her tone was polite but carried an undeniable pressure that allowed no rebuttal. Her eyes never smiled, and each time my mother spoke, it felt as if the temperature in the room dropped. Glancing at my father and brother, I noticed their complexions paled even though they weren't the ones being scolded. Even the family dog, peering up at my mother, seemed frightened, shrinking away. The in-laws, facing my mother's direct anger, all turned deathly pale.
It's just a little misunderstanding. Sarah and I just had a small argument.
Really?
Just a small argument, huh?
As Mike hurriedly made excuses, my mother's icy tone and look made him pale even more. Then, Mike turned his attack towards me.
It's underhanded for you to bring your own family here.
However, I was unfazed by Mike's attack.
Well, you are with your family too, aren't you? It's not underhanded at all, is it?
I immediately retorted, and Mike was at a loss for words. He seemed desperate to out-talk me, but he was clearly at a disadvantage. After a moment of thought, Mike's expression suddenly brightened, as if he had a brilliant idea.
Fine, I want a divorce. Doing whatever you want in my house.
It seemed like Mike thought he had one. Could that really be his trump card? Did he think that by mentioning divorce, I would be shocked and apologize? I felt nothing about being divorced by Mike at this point. My affection for Mike had been exhausted long ago. With a sigh, I opened my mouth and dropped a bombshell.
I'm fine with the divorce, but don't forget to pay for your affair. What? You thought I didn't notice? Having an affair with a coworker in this small town. It was bound to come out.
Yes, Mike had been having an affair with a woman in her 30s at the company run by his classmate. The woman was also married, so this revelation was bound to cause a scandal. I had been suspicious because Mike had been coming home late. I found a woman's handkerchief in his pocket and a hotel receipt, which confirmed the affair. There's no detective agency in this rural area, so I had to investigate myself, and I found evidence of the affair one after another. Aren't you even trying to hide it? I wondered, as more and more evidence piled up.
I can definitely request divorce if I submit this to a lawyer. Then let me introduce you to a lawyer I know.
Really? That would be helpful, Dad. Mike was obviously shocked that his affair had been discovered, his face as white as paper. Yet, he hadn't given up and retorted with a trembling voice.
It's your fault. You're always busy with work and don't pay attention to me.
My brother immediately responded.
My wife works full-time too, but being neglected isn't a reason to have an affair. That's a rather selfish excuse.
My brother looked at Mike with disdain. Even though they were both married men, it was clear that my brother could not comprehend Mike's reasoning.
That's right. You're unreliable, and that's why our daughter has to work so hard. If you were a dependable husband, none of this would have happened.
My father chimed in with support, attacking Mike. Faced with their reasonable arguments, Mike could only mutter. My mother-in-law and Holly tried to defend him.
It's obviously your daughter's fault.
Yes.
And to think she claims to work so hard, her job isn't even that significant.
My mother responded instantly to their words.
Feel free to say whatever you want. I feel sorry for any lawyer who takes such a case. Do you not understand common sense?
My mother's sharp words made my mother-in-law step back involuntarily.
And Holly, do you even know how much my daughter earns? If you search her name, you'll see she works with well-known companies. And you talk so high and mighty, but aren't you unemployed at your age, living off your brother and his wife? Aren't you ashamed?
At that moment, Holly's face turned red.
How dare you say such things to my family?
Mike looked at the two being scolded by my mother, his face filled with restrained anger. My mother was only stating the truth, but it seemed Mike didn't like hearing it. Facing Mike, I sighed heavily and spoke.
I really wonder why I married someone like you. I'm astonished at my own lack of judgment. What did you say? You forgot what you did to me? Convenient memory you have, huh? And those two threw worse insults at me than my own family ever did. Called me the bottom of the barrel because I didn't finish college, a useless wife because I can't have kids.
Since we moved here, you've treated me like a convenient servant, haven't you? Compared to that, don't you think my family is quite reasonable? I unloaded all my accumulated grievances on them. Until now, I had been enduring it all, not wanting to worry my real family. But from now on, there's no need to endure.
Let's get a divorce. I'm sick of being exploited by you all. Wait, Sarah, calm down, let's talk this through. There's no need to talk anymore. I want to sever ties with you as soon as possible. And no matter how much we discuss, I will never forgive what you've done to me. You better brace yourselves for the consequences.
My words were the final blow, and Mike collapsed on the spot. My mother-in-law and Holly also slumped their shoulders in defeat. After that, we quickly began to pack and return to my parents' home.
Well, I'll be heading back to my parents' house now. I'll handle the divorce proceedings later.
I called out to Mike and his family, but there was no response. I let out a small sigh, packed up the tent and my belongings into the car, and left the in-laws' house. Afterward, I successfully divorced Mike. Getting a lawyer introduced by my father early on proved effective. The in-laws could be bold against me, but were utterly weak against an authoritative third party. The division of property demand was accepted just as I wished. However, Mike had no savings left after buying a house. He tried to borrow money from the classmate who had employed him but got caught having an affair with a colleague, which enraged his classmate. As a penalty for disrupting workplace discipline, both Mike and his affair partner were fired. Reluctantly, Mike borrowed money from a predatory lender to survive. Apparently, just paying the interest was a struggle for him. The affair partner was also divorced by her husband. Mike eventually had to sell the house he had just bought to cover living costs. After selling the house, Mike moved with his mother and Holly to a cheap, run-down place and barely managed to find a part-time job, leading a life of extreme financial distress. Holly finally decided to start working, but having no substantial work history, she couldn't even land a part-time job. His mother registered with a senior job placement service, but there being few jobs in the countryside, in the end, Mike had to support all three of them with his part-time earnings. Barely making ends meet on his own, the future holds nothing but bleak prospects for the three of them. While handling the divorce proceedings, I spent several days moving things out of the in-laws' house. During that time, a neighbor suddenly approached me.
"You're the new lady who moved in here recently, right?"
"Yes, that's right." The neighbor looked concerned and said,
"That family is quite infamous around here for being haughty and nasty to everyone. We were all worried about you. Are you okay? If you ever need to talk, I'm here for you."
When I moved here, I was whispered about by the locals and thought I was being ostracized as an outsider. But perhaps they were just worried about me. Realizing this, I relaxed and smiled. "I'm fine, thank you." Telling the neighbor about my divorce, she genuinely seemed relieved and said it was good news. I regretted thinking I shouldn't have moved to this place and silently apologized in my heart. Then left the in-laws' house with my belongings. If it weren't for Mike and his family, this place would have been a nice place to live. After moving out and completing the divorce proceedings, I finally settled down. However, one day, Mike sent me this message.
"Now it's all settled, right? Let's start over."
I had left Mike's contact unblocked. But receiving such a creepy message made me deeply regret not blocking him sooner.
"Start over with you? What kind of punishment game is that? No amount of money would make me reconsider. Don't ever contact me again. If you try to reach out to me again, I'll consult my lawyer."
After sending that message, I immediately blocked Mike's contact. From then on, Mike no longer had any involvement in my life. After our divorce, I moved back to the city and started living a carefree and comfortable life. I treated my family who supported me to a nice resort trip. It was a delightful time, making memories with my parents and my brother's family that will last a lifetime. With the divorce from Mike and no longer needing to care for his family, I now have more freedom, both emotionally and time-wise. I could dive back into work, but I don't need to push myself too hard financially anymore. There's no longer a need to support Mike's family, so my finances are more relaxed. Having learned from my failed marriage with Mike, I'm open to finding a new relationship. Being single at my age is not unusual in the city, and there seem to be plenty of opportunities for dating events targeted at people in their 40s. It will take some courage, but I'm planning to attend one of these parties soon. I've vowed never to neglect myself again. Remembering that I am the one who can truly value myself, I am looking forward to living a joyful life from here on out.
Surprise! Mom's coming along too.
With those words, my husband's excited voice echoed through the entryway. Behind the cheerful husband and mother-in-law, I stood, unable to hide my shock. And for good reason. After all, the trip my husband mentioned his mother was joining us on was our honeymoon. As I stood confused, unable to comprehend what my husband was saying, he pursed his lips and frowned.
"What's the matter? Aren't you happy?"
Happy? That was the last thing I could be. He must have known that. After all, I had repeatedly expressed how terrible my relationship with my mother-in-law was. She seems unable to forgive me for stealing her precious son. Whenever she sees me, she piles on the sarcasm as much as she possibly can. The tricky part is, she never shows this side of herself in front of my husband. She plays the part of the good mother-in-law perfectly. Because of this, no matter how much I confided in my husband about being mistreated, he barely believed me. However, he should have been well aware of my discomfort around her. Yet he planned something like this. What was he thinking?
"Hold on, it's today? There's no way we can get a flight or hotel now.
Of course, I hadn't booked anything for his mother. Trying to tag along without reservations during the peak travel season is unimaginable. As I explained this, my husband snorted as if it were obvious.
Well, give me all your tickets then. I'll go with Mom.
He reached out as if it were the most natural thing in the world, leaving me speechless. Really, what is he thinking? This isn't just any trip, it's our honeymoon. What kind of husband would go on his honeymoon with his mother? No, even a regular trip with this mother-in-law would be dreadful. As my mouth fell open in shock, my mother-in-law had a triumphant look on her face. It must be a proud moment for her, her son choosing her over his wife.
Come on, hurry up. I paid for it, so it shouldn't matter, right?
Thinking that because he paid for the trip, he could do whatever he wanted, this man. As I thought about it, something occurred to me.
By the way, about the cost of this trip.
My name is Kelly. I'm 28 years old and work for the company my father manages. Despite the initial criticism of my being a nepotism hire, I've worked diligently and started to earn some recognition. However, being the boss's daughter, I still occasionally hear hurtful comments behind my back. My husband, Tom, has been my support through all of this. He's the same age as me and was assigned to the same team, making it easy for us to start dating. He handled his work efficiently and contributed significantly to our performance, which pleased my father immensely. When we announced our engagement, my father was all for it.
So you're Tom.
I've heard a lot about you.
Yes, I'll make your daughter happy.
I remember how bright those exchanges between my father and Tom seemed at the time. At that point, my father was considering handing over the company to someone else. And there was even talk of Tom taking over. Being able to entrust the business to a capable son-in-law probably wasn't an unpleasant thought for my father. Since I was never one to be at the forefront, having a capable son-in-law to take over the company was the best possible outcome. That's probably what he was thinking. Although my father never directly discussed these matters with me or Tom, he often spoke about the mindset needed for managing during our meals together, so it seemed likely that it would happen eventually. Tom's father had passed away, and his mother lived alone in their family home. Tom always took great care of his mother, even rushing to her side during our dates if she needed help. He was raised by her alone, and he wanted to repay that debt, apologizing as I smiled and sent him off. How wonderful it was to be involved with someone who cherished his mother so much. But after we got married and started living together, I began to notice things.
I'm just gonna pop over to Mom's place.
This phrase had become almost like a mantra for him. And he went to see her almost every week.
Is your mother feeling ill?
When I asked out of concern, it seemed that was not the case.
Kelly, don't worry about it. Everyone needs some time to themselves, right?
At first, he would say this while stroking my head, but even that had stopped recently. One Saturday morning, as he was cheerfully preparing to leave, I asked him,
"Hey, are you going over to your mom's place again today?"
Until then, my husband, who had been in a good mood, abruptly stopped what he was doing and let out a heavy sigh.
Hey, what's up with that tone?
Startled by his words, I shrank back. Damn, I had spoken more harshly than I intended, but it was too late. He turned around and glared at me sharply.
It can't be helped. My mom is alone at home. I'm just checking in on her because you said you didn't like it, okay?
I flinched at his response. Yes, I've always been uncomfortable around my mother-in-law. It wasn't always like this, of course. The mother of the man I love. I wanted to cherish her just as much as my husband does. That was what I thought initially. But it's not guaranteed that the feeling will be reciprocated. My mother-in-law seemed to think of me as a cat thief who had stolen her son. Ever since we met, she had been making snide remarks when my husband wasn't around. It happened the first time I went to greet her. As soon as my husband left the table to use the restroom, and the sound of his footsteps faded, her demeanor changed completely. She looked me up and down as if appraising me.
I don't care if you're the boss's daughter or whatever, you're nothing special.
Before I could recover from the shock, she continued with heavy sarcasm.
To think you'd show your face after stealing Tom from me. I don't acknowledge you at all. Don't get it twisted.
She sneered at me, taking me aback, and slurped her coffee. Naturally, she hadn't served any coffee in front of me.
Hey!
Don't talk to me. It's creepy. Why did I have to face such hostility from someone I had just met? Even though I tried hard to speak up, she dismissed me immediately. As I stood bewildered, feeling utterly isolated, the sound of my husband returning from the restroom reached my ears. And just like that, as if nothing had happened, my mother-in-law suddenly smiled warmly again and offered me coffee as if she had just remembered.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Here I am not even offering you coffee. With a light laugh, my husband, who had just returned, forced a wry smile.
What's going on, Mom? You haven't served the coffee yet?
She's a lovely girl, Tom. I just forgot to offer the coffee. Saying that, she smiled kindly, appearing to be a good-natured person. I'd be happy if Kelly would feel comfortable talking to me without any reservations. I felt a chill down my spine. Ever since then, my mother-in-law has continued to make cutting remarks whenever my husband is not around. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. My husband must be unaware of the malice she shows only to me. Despite my attempts to talk to him about it, he always insisted, "My mom would never say that. If you hate it so much, you don't have to see her." My words never seemed to convince him, and he looked disappointed. At first, I pleaded earnestly. But no matter what I said, my husband always sided with his mother, so I gave up trying to clear up the misunderstanding. And I decided to take my husband's words at face value. I didn't have to see her. I avoid visiting my in-laws unless absolutely necessary. From his perspective, I probably just seemed to dislike his important mother.
Then, make sure to lock up.
Saying this, he headed to his mother's place without looking back at me again. Wait, I reached out, but grabbed only air. My husband's back blurred through my tears. On days we argue about his mother, he doesn't come home. It felt like a harsh reminder that his mother is more important to him than his wife. If it weren't for the issues with his mother, Tom would be a good husband. He notices when I'm struggling at work and supports me quickly, and even though he often works late, he helps with the housework. Maybe it's better this way since he said I don't have to see her, I muttered to myself while looking at a travel brochure. I shook my head, trying to focus on the plans in front of me. I had been looking forward to this honeymoon. For this honeymoon, at least, I won't have to think about my mother-in-law. At least my husband won't be called away to rush to her. Joining a team for a major project has increased my husband's overtime. As we consider his suggestions, I wonder where we should go. Perhaps we should indulge ourselves? As I flip through the pages, the temptation arises, but I quickly reconsider.
Since I've left all the planning to you, at least let me pay for it from my account.
Despite my insistence on sharing the costs of our honeymoon, he laughed it off without listening. If it's just him paying, spending too much isn't good. Moreover, I don't want to give my mother-in-law ammunition to mock me for being loose with money just because I'm the boss's daughter. With that thought, I can't help but smile wryly. I was trying to focus, but I find myself thinking about my mother-in-law again.
Oh, stop it.
Deciding to change the mood, I set aside the brochure and start preparing dinner as my husband will be home soon. Then comes the morning of our honeymoon. Amid my frantic preparations, the doorbell rings.
Yes?
I was at the door and, without checking the intercom, opened it only to be surprised.
What?
There she stood, in flashy clothes with a huge suitcase. Hearing my voice, my husband peeked out.
You're early, Mom.
He cheerfully greeted her. The mother-in-law, ignoring me, left me bewildered as I looked back and forth between them.
Early? What do you mean?
Despite the fact that we were supposed to be going on our honeymoon, what was with her massive luggage? Was she planning to stay at our place while we were gone? As I stood confused, my husband, with a smile resembling his mother's, announced,
"Surprise! Mom's coming with us." What?
Shocked by my husband's solo applause. A foolish sound escaped me.
What on earth are you talking about?
Like I said, Mom's coming on our honeymoon. Unable to hide my confusion, my husband pursed his lips and said, then joyfully put his arm around his mother's shoulder.
If we're going on a trip, it's better with Mom.
Watching her sunbeam, my mother-in-law turned a smug face towards me. No, wait a minute. I try to calm my confused mind and ask carefully.
It's our honeymoon, right? Aren't honeymoons supposed to be just for the couple? I mean, if you really wanted to invite an important family member, shouldn't you have discussed it first?
Am I wrong? I'm not wrong, right? Yet why do they look puzzled by my words? It's like we're not speaking the same language, and I can't believe what my husband is saying. Furthermore, my mother-in-law, seemingly pleased by my distress, even starts humming. Why do we have to argue on what should be a joyful honeymoon day?
And a surprise? What do you mean by springing this on the day of the trip?
What's the big deal?
I paid for it, so it's fine.
My husband snaps, noticing my stunned expression. No, it's not fine. Was his insistence on paying not to ease my burden, but to make sure I couldn't object to bringing his mother?
Wait, you can't just spring this on me, it's obviously impossible.
I say, sighing in frustration. Both my husband and mother-in-law start to look visibly upset.
What do you mean, impossible?
Oh, Kelly just doesn't want to travel with me. My mother-in-law complains as if she's the victim, my husband acting childishly, mirroring her tone. My headache intensifies.
It's not about wanting or not wanting. Tom, did you even book the flight and hotel for your mom?
He looks baffled. Huh? We can book that now.
That's impossible. Do you know how far in advance I had to make reservations?
I raise my voice, incredulous at their lack of planning. Could they really have thought it would all just work out on the day? Though I had resolved not to splurge, the hotel I booked was quite nice. Especially now during a peak travel period.
There's no way there are vacancies on flights or at the hotel now.
I argue, and my husband nonchalantly holds out his hand.
Then give me all your tickets. What?
I ask, utterly bewildered.
Just give me your tickets if there aren't any for Mom.
I paid for the trip, so I'm ordering you. As my triumphant mother-in-law's face comes into view, everything before me goes dark. What? What does this mean? What am I being told?
Since Mom went through all the trouble to prepare, I'll go on the trip just with her. We can go on a different trip together later, Kelly, okay?
My husband's rationale, prioritizing his mother as naturally as breathing, leaves me unable to keep up. Or does he think everything will just smooth over if he goes on the trip without me? I've said it time and again, but this is supposed to be our honeymoon. A trip meant for just my husband and me. And now, out of nowhere, his mother shows up expecting to go with us, thinking it's some kind of surprise. Mom went through all the trouble to prepare? I couldn't care less. If anyone should be making concessions, it should be her going home. Yet here I am, being told by my husband to just give up. I'm utterly dumbfounded.
I was going to keep quiet,
I say, holding my throbbing head and letting out a heavy sigh.
But the trip is actually being paid for by my father. You haven't paid a dime, so you have no right to demand my ticket.
When I tell him this, it's now my husband's turn to look bewildered. That makes sense. He thought he had paid, which is why he felt so entitled.
Why would your father do that?
As he starts to sweat, I give him a cold look.
He gave us the honeymoon funds to save for our future.
And he even told me to keep quiet about it, considering your pride.
Why didn't you tell me?
My husband yells, his face turning red with the shock. The mother-in-law, who had been smug up until now, probably didn't expect that my father was the one paying. She starts to fidget nervously. Watching my husband's tantrum, I feel my emotions cooling rapidly. All the tolerance for my mother-in-law's snide remarks and my husband's mother-first attitude just drains away.
If you two are going, then you'll need to reimburse my father, and I'll cancel the reservations. Go on your trip with your own money.
As I shake off my husband and mother-in-law's frantic attempts to stop me, I grab my packed bags and leave the house. This is no joke. There's no way I'm letting my father's money be used for such a selfish mother and son duo. Thanks to them dumping everything on me because they were busy, all the reservations for the flight and hotel were in my name, so I started canceling them as I get into the taxi I had called. Instead of heading to the planned airport, I give the driver my parents' address, and the taxi starts moving, albeit with a hint of confusion. When a daughter supposed to be on her honeymoon returns home with heavy luggage, my father is shocked beyond belief. But when he hears the whole story, he becomes furious.
What the hell is that? Are they kidding?
The constant calls from my husband only fuel my father's anger further. And of course, my own. After telling my father everything, my resolve solidifies.
Dad, I think I want to divorce.
I state clearly, and my father calms his anger and quietly supports me. Without saying whether it's good or bad, he just gently rubs my back, his hand warm.
I'm sorry, Dad.
As tears spill over, I see my father's other hand clenched tightly. The next day, my husband comes to my parents' house to apologize. My father stops me as I try to send him away at the gate.
If you're going to divorce, you need to talk it out. I want to hear his side of the story directly.
Let him in. Though I had intended to involve a lawyer, I let him in because my father insisted. As my husband realizes my father is at the door, he quickly apologized. Seeing my husband act meekly just because he's in front of my father irritates me. As he continues to act overly apologetic, my father signals me to lead them to the sitting room.
I am terribly sorry for causing such a disturbance.
Before he can even finish greeting, my husband starts begging. It seems like he talks to my father like that when he's dealing with him in a businesslike manner. Accustomed to it from work, his perfectly executed apology is almost sickening.
What are you apologizing for, exactly?
My father sighs, not knowing how many times he has done so already. I felt the same way. My husband said he was sorry for causing a disturbance. He wasn't apologizing for what he did to me. That's just insulting. In a rush to say something, my husband started to speak, but I cut him off and handed him a piece of paper.
Here's the divorce papers. I've already completed mine.
I said this deliberately politely, and his face turned pale as if he hadn't expected the divorce papers to come out at all.
Wait, Kelly, divorce, what are you talking about?
It seemed like the first time he actually looked at me since he came into the house. To him, I'm always second best.
It doesn't bother you, right? You have your mother after all.
If that's his intention, I might as well speak to him as I would a business associate. I have no intention of repairing our relationship. I must make my feelings clear through my actions.
What are you talking about? Why bring up my mother now? She was looking forward to that trip too. We can go with Kelly anytime, right?
I was appalled. He didn't understand at all why I was angry and left.
Anytime, what are you talking about? It was supposed to be our honeymoon.
I trembled with rage, trying to suppress it with my right hand. My clenched lips hurt.
What kind of husband tries to go on a honeymoon he planned with his wife, with his mother instead?
Speaking out loud made it all the more pathetic. But my husband continued as if to rub salt in the wound.
But I was initially trying to take her with us. It was Kelly who said there were no flights available or that the hotels were booked. Think about it. It's impossible to get anything on the day you tell me.
Unbelievable. He was serious. Amidst my confusion and anger, he was genuinely shouting that it was my fault.
And you're telling my mother to go back? She was looking forward to it so much.
He spat it out with such ferocity it seemed he might physically grab me. My father quietly intervened. Enough. Stop it. Until now, my father had been listening silently and shook his head in dismay.
Tom, I am disappointed in you. No way.
Suddenly calmer, my husband straightened up at those words. My father just looked at him with a sad expression.
Why did you prioritize your mother over Kelly in that situation? Well,
Pressed by my father, my husband started to sweat. He could argue back at me, but not at my father.
A honeymoon is meant to be for the couple. You could have traveled with your mother any other time, right? Was your promise to cherish my daughter a lie? It wasn't a lie. I just wanted to value my mother too.
My father glared at him for the first time.
So you don't mind hurting Kelly?
My husband fell silent. I'm sorry. He apologized with a trembling voice. But his clenched hands betrayed his humiliation. He was apologizing because he had to, not because he felt it was necessary. He probably didn't think there was anything wrong with what happened. He was apologizing because he was in trouble with my father, the CEO, nothing more.
Tom, you are competent at your job.
At my father's words, my husband relaxed, thinking he was forgiven, but then realized he was mistaken. But a gaze colder than a midwinter lake pierced through him.
But no matter how capable you are at work, I can't trust someone who doesn't value family.
My father then handed him a pen, and my husband started to shake.
Wait, please! Anything but divorce! I'll change!
My husband wouldn't take the pen, so my father forced it into his hand.
You should be apologizing to someone else, not me.
Now my husband turned to me, begging.
Kelly, say something, please! I'm begging you, not a divorce!
He came to my feet as if fleeing from my father, looking up at me while clinging to my legs.
From now on, I'll prioritize you.
I couldn't even cry anymore. Disdain for me was apparent in every word he said.
Please! If you divorce me, I won't be able to pay off the debt.
Seeing that neither my father nor I were nodding, he shouted as if it slipped out. Debt?
What is that?
As I looked down at his disheveled head, I repeated the new word I just heard. And my husband jumped away from my feet in shock. He seemed to have blurted it out without thinking.
Well, that.
As my father and I silently demanded he tell everything, my husband finally resigned himself to explain.
Well, actually.
The truth hesitantly revealed by my husband was enough to make both my father and me hold our heads. It turns out, my husband and mother-in-law believed without a doubt that the CEO of the company would fall into their laps, and they had been splurging without regard for money. The reason he went back to his mother's house every week was apparently because they were spending money together.
There's even less reason to keep the marriage now.
My father, utterly contemptuous and speechless, watches as my husband finally shows a genuine act of contrition.
Please wait. If you divorce me, I won't know what to do tomorrow.
His repeated apologizing was almost comical, like a toy I'd seen somewhere.
That's none of our concern.
I send a dry look his way and just wait for him to sign the divorce papers. There's nothing more to talk about, so my father and I quietly sip our coffee. Of course, none for my husband. Though the divorce papers were somewhat coerced, the divorce went through without a hitch. The lawyer my father hired was incredibly capable, and apparently, negotiations went smoothly, partly because I had kept a detailed diary. We even claimed alimony that included the cancelled honeymoon costs, and there was an attempt through lawyers to reduce it. My father told me he had rejected it before I could even respond, and I couldn't help but laugh. As for my ex-husband, he quit his job hurriedly as the divorce became known at the company, making things awkward for him. Leaving on his own meant little severance pay, and with just a small amount of savings left, he struggled to pay the alimony and his debts, forcing him into a much more modest life, I heard from the lawyer. And as for the former mother-in-law, she's bedridden and scraping by with part-time jobs, so desperate that she's been asking old colleagues for money. While it's unclear how true this all is, it now makes for a funny story at gatherings. As for me, I am likely to take over as the next CEO of the company after my father, who has decided to retire, and the other employees have pushed me to step up. Despite my reluctance to be in the forefront, persuaded by my father's rare show of vulnerability, he didn't want to leave the company to someone unreliable. I accepted the responsibility. Though I was initially hesitant, it turns out I may have inherited some business acumen from my father. With his support as chairman, our company's performance has continued to improve. Thanks to gaining more confidence in myself, I've started to receive more invitations to parties where business people gather. I'm not thinking about a new romance just yet, but maybe it's time to take the next step.